You are listening to Therapist Unplugged for straight talk on life, relationships, and mental health. I am your host, Lori Poole, licensed professional counselor with the Montfort Group in North Dallas. Each episode will feature the unplugged views of guests and fellow therapists as we navigate hot topics, therapy trends, and the world around us. So here we are, Gergana. I am so excited to talk with you today about EMDR therapy because you hear the term spoken quite a bit, but I'm not sure that people really understand what EMDR therapy is. So could you sort of share what it is? Like, what does EMDR mean? What does it stand for?
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me to chat with you.
Oh,
I'm a big
absolutely.
fan of your podcast, so I'm thrilled. But yeah, also, I'm a big fan of EMDR too.
Yes.
I really believe in that intervention. So what is EMDR? Okay, so the acronym EMDR stands for eye movement and desensitization and reprocessing. And we'll kind of go into it and talk more about what each one of these means in particular. But
Okay.
overall, EMDR is a memory-based psychotherapy that is probably one of the most effective and efficient ways to treat trauma. And in a way, kind of to use the words of the founder of EMDR therapy, it's a way to move the past into the past.
Before we get into what EMDR therapy is actually all about and how it works, Gergana, I'm just curious about, are there certain types of trauma that are best suited for this form of therapy? Or can it be applied to a variety of different scenarios? I'm just thinking for our listeners who may say, oh, well, maybe that's something I'd like to explore.
I love that question because EMDR has kind of evolved over the years. It started out with a standard protocol that kind of was most suited for a single traumatic event, right? Addressing a single traumatic event.
Okay.
But over time, um, the modality has grown and evolved. And Francine Shapiro, who started it, she also started the EMDR Institute that was dedicated to research around EMDR and how to kind of continue to expand its reach and the way it helps clients. So right now, you can use EMDR for acute stress, right? Acute traumatic stress. And that's kind of immediately after a traumatic event. Let's say a client is in a car crash or witnesses something very traumatic, and within 3 days and a month of this happening, they're noticing that their nervous system gets really overwhelmed. So they can come and we can use EMDR for them.
Okay.
For PTSD, it's one of the kind of most known interventions to treat combat veterans, for example, or any kind of PTSD when people have witnessed or been exposed in some way to a traumatic event, and that kind of continues to impact their lives. And I'm not going to go into all the kind of criteria for diagnosing with PTSD, but it is very effective for that.
Okay.
And it is really effective, and it's being used a lot lately in treating CPTSD, which is complex PTSD. And you kind of know that, right? Like sometimes clients come in with a very clear idea that they have this traumatic thing they need to process, right? That's impacting their lives. Okay. But a lot of times, you and I know, we have clients that come in and they present with intense anxiety or some phobias that they can't quite place. High achievers, right, who on the surface look like they have it all together, but are struggling with this underlying feeling of not being enough. People struggle with relationships, can't keep a job, right? There are all these kind of patterns they're noticing in their lives that are not serving them. They seek help for that, and they come and present with these, right, signs and symptoms. And as we start digging as therapists and kind of being curious and pulling on threads, we might actually link some of these things to previous traumatic or adverse experiences.
Right.
And EMDR is excellent at addressing those. And in fact, it starts with not just kind of treating the trauma that's causing, right, these dysfunctions later in life, but also being able to identify that there was trauma that is causing all these unwanted patterns.
You know, to your point,
Yeah,
Gergana, as you know, I have
yeah,
also
yeah,
been doing EMDR therapy,
yeah,
and what brought me to it was my phobia of vomiting. And anybody who knows me knows I have a real phobia around that.
yeah.
And as we processed the phobia, there
Mhm.
was trauma from childhood that surfaced that I never linked to
Yeah,
my fear of vomiting. So
yeah.
it just on a, a personal level,
Mhm.
I have been amazed at what comes up
Yeah,
just in the
yeah,
processing, and we'll talk more
yeah,
about what that
yeah,
looks like. But
yeah.
I've been really fascinated by EMDR therapy from my own personal experience, but also for reasons you've just cited in terms of, with military veterans and
Mhm.
others, how effective it's been in helping clients work through this without reliving
Yeah,
the
yeah,
experience.
yeah,
So I'm so happy we're having this
yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
Yeah.
I am too. And that is a really key point, right? This is not about reliving, but about revisiting and even redoing, right? And we can talk
Yeah.
about it. But a lot of times when you suggest EMDR to clients, and sometimes it's faced with resistance because people are afraid of going back to a place of profound pain, right? Or they're worried that they may not be able to handle it,
Yeah.
or right? They're afraid of what might come up, or
Yeah.
some people really have this conflict around, am I going to discover something, right, about the people that were supposed to love me and care for me? They ended up hurting me.
Yeah.
So sometimes people resist, and I think that's key to kind of emphasize that we're not going to relive this. We're going to revisit for the purpose of shifting, right?
Yes. For the
To
purpose of
a
shift.
different, yeah, yeah,
All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about what EMDR is so that our listeners have a better understanding and
yeah,
even consider this for themselves.
yeah. Okay. So the eye movement part, right? This is how Francine Shapiro accidentally discovered actually the benefits of that intervention. I think she was a research psychologist, and I don't know the details of the story. The point is, she had received some bad news related to her health. And as somebody who was very connected to her body and mindfulness and meditation, I guess walking in the park was her safe place. So she went out to walk and kind of processing the news that she had just received. And I don't know if there were things on both sides of her. I'm assuming it was trees. I don't know. Don't quote me on this. But she was moving her eyes left to right, back and forth, right, between these things along the path. And suddenly, because she was really connected to her body, she noticed that the distress she was feeling had reduced significantly.
Wow.
So, as a researcher, naturally, she went back and started kind of digging into it,
Yeah.
and that's where the intervention came out of. So, originally, it was eye movement
Yeah.
because it's kind of mimicking REM sleep. So, I'm going to try to kind of organize this in a way that a non-clinical person can follow and also can find it helpful, because I don't want to get too
We don't want to get too
technical,
into the
too
weeds.
dense into
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
neuroscience. But essentially, EMDR kind of allows people to access the natural healing, right, functions of the body, the natural healing processes of the body. And that natural healing involves REM sleep, right? That's when kind of all the experiences we have get organized and stored and eventually processed and eventually moved into long-term memory. What happens with traumatic events or memories kind of get stuck or frozen in the nervous system. So they don't get to move through that natural process. So they call it the adaptive information processing of the mind. But, anyways, traumatic experiences don't move through the process. They kind of get frozen,
Mhm.
right? And so every time you experience something that in some way resembles that or reminds you of it, that link between the central nervous system and the fear, right,
Yeah,
center of the brain activates the nervous system, and you're having an experience as if it's happening to you right now.
right. Yeah.
So what EMDR is doing is kind of jump starting, right, this ability of the brain to process, consolidate, organize memories in a very similar mechanism as REM sleep. So that then, right, you can integrate these traumatic from the traumatic memory bank, right, into the more adaptive information kind of holding space and the
Wow. Wow.
yeah. So that's how it started with eye movement.
Okay.
And
That's the one
since
I've done. I follow a ball back and
then,
forth on the screen.
yeah, yeah, that's kind of the original. That's how it
Okay.
started.
Yeah.
Since then, we've started using other ways of activating left right brain, right, and that they're called bilateral stimulation. It could be tapping, yeah.
Yeah.
It could be tactile. I have these pulsers that clients can hold, and they get activated. They kind of vibrate left to right, left to right. There's some people use sound, right? There are different ways,
Okay.
but it's always about bilateral stimulation.
Bilateral stimulation.
And kind of in the simplest of ways, what EMDR does, similarly to the REM process, right, is it activates all the three major parts of the brain at the same time.
Ah.
So that then that's where kind of the healing happens, right? That natural healing process of the body. So we have like the brainstem, like survival brain and the
Yeah.
vagus nerve. There's the emotional part, right? The amygdala, limbic system. That's where we hold the ability for emotion regulation, attachment,
Yes.
safety, right? That's held there.
Okay.
And then the cerebral cortex, kind of the lobes of the prefrontal cortex, where we have the ability to kind of reason things, sequence, right? Make conclusions, all of that. So all three of those get activated at the same time.
Wow.
So now we go into what the desensitization part, right, stands for. That's basically the part of EMDR when we're reducing the vividness and intensity of the traumatic memory.
Okay.
So it reduces distress, right? The emotional charge is lower through kind of, yeah, so it feels different, right? It's not going away. It's still there. It's just
Yeah.
moving right into
Yes.
long-term memory, and it doesn't feel as difficult and overwhelming. And during the reprocessing part, then that's kind of when the reevaluation and the restructuring happens, right, of thoughts and beliefs.
Yes.
Um, and that's kind of the part where we bring in and kind of integrate some of more of these adaptive right views of others and the world and self. So that's it in a nutshell, right? It starts from the past.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically kind of shifting the way you perceive and experience past experiences, and you re-engage with your present and the future in a different ways. That's the beauty, kind of the benefit of EMDR.
Wow. That's a lot. Like just the way you described, like how this part of the brain and that part of the brain and then this get, it's like, holy mackerel, that's a lot of processing, which as someone who has been a client in an EMDR therapy, I never thought about it that way. I will only say that in my experience, what has never failed to amaze me is how um, I am able throughout the session to start pulling things together and going, oh my God,
Yeah,
this is because of that.
yeah,
Or something else will come up. And it's really quite effortless. It's not like I'm pulling a blank,
Mhm.
and if I do, then we just, we do the eye processing again.
Yeah.
Um, but it really is, it fascinates me, and, I'm so glad that you're here describing that. Let me ask, when you're doing EMDR with clients, um, what what have you noticed, or what kind of responses do clients have, immediately following a session? I'm just curious. I don't even know if you can categorize it in terms of a theme or a trend or a pattern. But I'm just curious if
Yeah.
there's anything.
So, I mean, obviously, every person has a different experience, right, with
Yeah.
EMDR, and a different, and they approach kind of unpacking, right, the
Yeah.
experience differently. Um, I think a common theme for a lot of people, especially those who have struggled with something for a very long time and haven't been able to find an answer, hopped from therapist to therapist, used an intervention to intervention, and just things just weren't clicking for them, right? And they're
Yeah.
feeling kind of stuck and helpless
Yeah.
um, with the obstacles they're experiencing in life, and they have this experience with EMDR. And like you said, the channels start to open, they start to make the connections, that they're connecting the dots, things are starting to make sense, right? And then all of a sudden, there's this coherent story, right,
Mm.
about who I am, what my life is, right? Things start to make sense. People are amazed by that. They're really enjoying that. That, oh my gosh, right? I finally understand. That's one aspect of it. And the other one is, I think I've mentioned this in another conversation before. It feels like you just opened a pressure valve, and all of these intense emotions are all of a sudden like coming out and flooding your system, right? And you, it could feel overwhelming at
Yes,
first,
for
right?
sure.
Because they have been locked away and frozen for a very long time, and here they are all of a sudden, and I'm feeling all of these things, and I'm having all of these thoughts, right? And I'm having a very different experience from what I thought things were.
Right.
And that could feel like a lot. And that's why we resource clients before we go into the reprocessing.
Okay.
There's this kind of preparation stage when we make sure that clients have sufficient ability to regulate their emotions, or kind of have some distress tolerance skills, or we do these kind of resourcing exercises for visualizing like a safe
Yes.
space or an
Yep.
ally, right?
Yep.
Um, so these are the tools then you can use between sessions to then soothe your own nervous system. At
Wow.
that point, my favorite part, and it's related to something that you said earlier about EMDR, is that it's so kind of empowering for clients because it gives them the autonomy of their own healing, right?
Mm.
You are doing the work.
Wow.
Your own mind is fascinating. Our bodies are fascinating. And it's just kind of right pulling all the threads and putting things together. And then we have a full picture, right? The puzzle is there. So at the end, um, clients feel kind of newly empowered, right? They've
Mm.
reclaimed their ability to live the life they want. That's what I love a lot. Yeah.
They reclaim the life they love to live, or that they want to live,
Yeah.
that they deserve to live.
Yeah.
They reclaim. Wow, you just said a whole lot, Gergana, as you always do, my friend. Man, I'm so glad this is being recorded
Yeah.
because I listen to it again and again. You talked about allowing access to the natural healing
Yeah.
process of the body.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about
Yeah.
when you say it's like clients have the autonomy.
Yeah.
They're the ones who join the dots, who create this sort of,
Yeah.
to share another personal story, because I guess that's where
Uh-huh.
I'm today.
Yeah.
When I was doing EMDR and I was doing this, all this stuff about
Yeah.
my fear of puking, what came to the surface was that as a child, I was not allowed to express distress. So the idea that I would throw up
Mhm.
that I wasn't allowed to say, I didn't feel like I could say, I don't feel good.
Yeah.
Right. So then vomiting became like this source of fear because I
Yeah.
couldn't let go. Right. So, and not only that, I had to be covert about how terrible I felt.
Mhm.
But it was only through EMDR that I was able to say, oh my God, now I understand. I was not allowed to express distress.
Yeah.
And it was like, I mean, I can't say that I'm entirely over the phobia, but it's not what it was before
Yeah.
at all. And that was such a revelation because then that spilled into other things
Mhm.
and
Mhm. Yeah.
understanding at a much deeper level about other aspects of my life or how I show up in relationships and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been a very exciting journey for me as a therapist and as
Yeah.
a client to get to the bottom of some of this stuff and just have these revelations and go, wow. And it's all stuff that comes out of my own mouth. It's not like
Yeah.
a therapist is feeding me
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. No.
She'll say, okay, hold that. Let's
Yeah.
go there. And then the blue ball goes across
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah. Just follow, notice, witness. And that's,
Yes.
yes, that's the beauty of it. You are right, and you're guiding the process. And the therapist is just there to support, to
Yeah.
encourage, to validate, to kind of remind you you're not alone
Yeah.
and you're safe and this is a different experience. And that's what we call dual attention, that ability. And that's the job of the therapist, right? To
Yeah.
make sure that you're reminded that you're here and now, right? So you're holding one foot in the present
Mhm.
and then one foot in the past. Yeah, and it's also our job to kind of make sure that things are moving
Yes.
in the right. So there are no in the beginning of I don't know. You probably have had that experience, but the way we describe to clients what their role is in EMDR is kind of like imagine yourself you're sitting on a train that's driving past by these beautiful like landscapes and you are not stopping to take it in and think about it. You are just observing, right? Like you're on the train and you're just watching the landscape as it passes by. Well, sometimes we encounter roadblocks, like sometimes clients get stuck on a space and they just can't move forward from there.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's the therapist's job to kind of make sure to clear the tracks, right, and keep the
Yeah.
train towards relief and recovery. But yeah, you're doing the work, and that redoing part, right? In therapy, I mean, when we're trying to empower clients to kind of gain control over their own life and their decision, right? So, trauma, what happened is just as important as what didn't happen.
Mhm.
So, as you're doing EMDR, right, there are two ways in which I, as a therapist, can support my clients and give them the opportunity of this redoing or reclaiming. It's on the one hand, I'm offering the understanding and validation and support, right? You've got this and you're safe, or you have the whatever the thing might be, right? And then the other part is then the client and the last part, right? And the reprocessing part or future templating is what we do at the very end, last stage. Then they get to show up as that kind of more adaptive, wise, mature version of themselves and
Wow.
offer that nurturing, right? To the more fractured, fragile part of them that was impacted by trauma. Yeah.
What an amazing form of therapy, Gergana. I know we're running out of a bit of time here, but in very quickly, when a client first starts with you with EM,
Mhm.
what could they expect in that first session?
So the first session, just like any other therapeutic kind of approach, will be history gathering, right? We'll talk about what brings you here. Like I will try to learn a little bit more about what they're struggling with, what their challenges are, what their hopes and expectations are from therapy. And maybe that's where we start with the float backs, right? Where we start with, oh, here's your current experience. What does that feel like, right? What are you thinking? What does it feel in the body? And then we could maybe ask direct questions like, was there another time that you felt that way? Or can you think of an earlier time? When was the first time you called yourself a loser? Right.
Mm.
And these are kind of the ways that we find our connection back to the root cause of present day challenges.
Okay.
And that's how we identify the targets, right? And then that could be then depending on the client, right? Session 1 or session 2, then we'll do the targeting, we'll identify what the targets are. And from there on, it kind of gets more technical, but we look at how distressing it is, right? Because the goal is at the end of EMDR therapy that the distress will be 0 out of 10, right? 0,
Mm.
1 out of 10. And
That
then,
must be such a relief when you just say, by the end of EMDR therapy, the stress will be 0 out of 10. To all our listeners, imagine what that might feel like. 0 out of 10. What a relief.
yeah.
What a relief. So, in terms of that first session, how many sessions is there sort of an average number of sessions someone could expect, or is it really very
Yeah.
individual based on client and what they're coming in for, et cetera?
Yeah, it is very individual.
Okay.
It depends on what the client is processing. It depends on how ready they are. Remember, this is entirely, right, accessing their own body's ability to heal. So people move at different pace.
Of course. That makes
Some blocks might show up, right? And there are kind of ways, interventions that we can use during the process to remove the blocks. There are like interweaves, and I don't want to get too technical, but there are things we can do, right, to make sure that we keep clearing the tracks
right.
for the healing to continue. So yeah, it varies. Some people are able to process an experience within 1 or 2 sessions of reprocessing, and then we do the future templating. That's kind of that, changing, shifting the way of relating to the future that happens. Kind of the more adaptive, right, approach to life circumstances. Some people take a couple of sessions. Some people in the process of, right, healing one traumatic event, identify more targets, because
Yeah.
there are all these channels, right? There are all these memory channels that keep kind of like clogging, and they lead to other places. And so sometimes clients will identify new targets. So we'll clear a target and then move on to another one. It really depends. Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough for the overview that you've provided today. For anyone listening to this podcast who is interested in exploring EMDR therapy, you can reach Gergana through our website at themontfortgroup.com. You can schedule an appointment online. You can call the office. Gergana's bio is on our website, so you can read all about her wonderful experience. Gergana's, I can't thank you enough for today. I think you're just a fabulous therapist, and anybody who's sitting in the chair across from you is a very lucky person. I'm going to say
So
that. All right.
thank you
So
so much.
thank you again, and I'm sure we'll come back to maybe another episode on EMDR. Maybe we can get a little bit more into the types of trauma
Yeah.
that show up and some of the things that
Yeah.
you've worked with, again, to give clients and listeners an idea of just how diverse this form of therapy is, because it's really pretty special.
Yeah. It really is. I've heard it being described as magical, and I kind of see why.
Yeah, I do
Based
too.
on my experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much, Gergana. We'll talk again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Montfort Group aims to provide a serene, calming setting where you can feel challenged, supported, and motivated. Our skilled therapists bridge specialized backgrounds and varied philosophies together to create one unified strategy. Rather than steer you away from your own natural abilities, we help you maximize your unique strengths to uncover the boldest version of yourself. We do not view a broken history as the end of a story. We see it as an opportunity for a new beginning. To learn more about our practice and how we can help you, please visit us at themontfortgroup.com.